I would like to call to order the Romeo Downtown Development Authority special meeting for Tuesday, April 18th at 7:15 a.m. at the Romeo DDA office. This is to discuss our 2023-2024 budget workshop, part 2. Elizabeth, can you do a roll call?
Yes. Tar.
Here.
St. Laurent.
Here.
McLeod.
Here.
Rose.
Here.
Hayes.
Here.
Poznanski is absent. Hutnick.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum. Next up, we have public forum. Is there anybody that would like to speak? No? All right.
I just want to say
Sure.
one thing. I thank you last night for putting that on the agenda about, possibly considering moving this to the Planning Commission. I realize there's some disconnect and some issues going on here. I hope that I hope it can get resolved. And just, I know how the budget process works and I know how all these things happen. I would think that maybe just from a perspective of knowing how this all works, possibly looking at just a basic budget until it can all be figured out, because if it moves to the Planning Commission, it's all going to have to be looked at again. And I applaud every one of you for doing what you've done. Zach, I can't thank you enough for being on the board as long as you have. John, Greg, Justin, this is not easy stuff. This is not easy stuff at all. And again, I hope it can get resolved. But I appreciate the fact that you guys were forward thinking, and possibly moving it to the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, since there's no more public comment, I will move forward to an approval of the agenda. Can I get an approval of the agenda as presented?
I'll make a motion with the date change correct.
Okay, we have a motion by St. Laurent to make an approval of the agenda with the updated date information. Do I have a second?
Second.
Who's that? Second by McLeod. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Agenda is approved. All right, we're going to move into the budget workshop and discussion. I did print some stuff off for you guys here. I tried to take what we were looking at in our category budget, simplify it a little bit. I pulled out the numbers as far as projected income for potential sponsorships, as well as the renting of the space, because it's not truly there and we don't really have a plan in place for how to hit those amounts. I think they should be more goals than worked into our existing budget. If it comes, great. The money will be, the board will decide how those funds are allocated in the future. So that really gives us about $221,550 to work with. So all that considered, I know we talked about some asks at our last budget meeting, and we'll have to figure out how that works into these categories. I did try to kind of, it's not color-coded because you have black and white copies here, but just kind of, instead of giving the pillars predetermined funds, more of a category breakdown of where each pillar would be pulling funds from as they're considering how they're going to spend their dollars. So I think maybe we should just start by going around the room, getting everybody's input, have the floor, state your piece a little bit, and then we'll move into the broader discussion of what funds are going to go where to get to that $221,550 number.
Would I be able to say something? Or you want me
Let's
to do the board first? Okay.
yeah, let's
All right.
Greg, I'm going to start with you. We'll work our way around.
I don't have any further comments from last time. The only thing I do hear loud and clear what Lisa's saying, and I think there could be some wisdom to slow stepping this a little bit. I don't know as though we got to jam it through. I think maybe the village is going to maybe have some say. There could be some changes coming up. Practical matters, you know where I stand on some of these. I've gotten 2 quotes now for the surveying, and then the dumpster corrals are the other things I think we got to get going on in the state survey, so we can then do other projects. But so no, other than that, I don't have any further input.
you know, I think the pillar thing is, we got way ahead of ourselves, we haven't even adopted it, we've just talked pillar, and we collectively as a group have never even adopted that as, hey, this is the way we're gonna go. It was just simply an idea that was floated out there by Elizabeth's people that spoke to us a month and a half ago. I think that bogged down a lot of discussion and muddied a lot of the waters, so.
Sure. And are there the potential for grants for those stake surveys, do you think? Is that something?
That would be something Elizabeth would have to do. They're not expensive. I had one quote come in, two good reputable firms, about $5,000. The other one was about $8,000, they said.
Okay.
Until they get in the field more and sniff around, but they did a fair amount of due diligence ahead of time, so I think it's gonna be within the strike zone on the quotes, which I thought was very encouraging. You know, we could clearly do one of those each year and really have a good idea of who's who and where's where in the village, which would then help us with anything we want to do, if it's these pole placements, if it's dumpster corrals, if it's encouraging or helping people modify and correct their parking situation. We would actually know who owns what, so that we could help them somehow do it and not have a big discussion on really where the boundary lines are.
Sure. So that's something that could be presented to the board and request for approval to kick that project off if it comes forward.
Yeah, and I think that would be something that would comfortably fall within the DDA's guidelines of what it is we're supposed to do. I don't see the village taking the initiative to do something like that, and I think it could help everybody.
Okay.
So we could maybe do some cost sharing too for those people who are being surveyed in that area, because they may be interested in knowing themselves where their true boundary lines are.
Okay. All right, Andrea?
So, a couple things. I think, as far as budget specific, I shared with the Pillar Committee and with Elizabeth the information on the meeting I had with the marketing company. And funding-wise, we are in the right idea. So that definitely works for the full spectrum marketing program that we had talked about. It would cover everything from our social media management to targeted marketing, both by demographic and location, really finding and bringing people from outside of Romeo to Romeo. It was a really great meeting and very, very willing to work with us and continue on. So I think that was great. As far as, you know, the budget, my understanding was last night at the meeting that it was a discussion of the ability for the Planning Commission to absorb the DDA. But going off of what our DDA attorney says, we should continue as a DDA board while we have been appointed as a DDA board. So I think to jump ahead and kind of whitewash the budget because the village council may choose to absorb it is kind of neglectful of what we're here to do. So until they've made that decision, I think we continue on, we make our budget, and we continue to do the work that we've been doing.
Thank you. So where would you see that marketing expense go? Like, what category should we be putting that in?
Well, that's kind of what I had sent to you and Stacy was my questions of the budget in general. You know, there's some concerns regarding the category budget, and I know we haven't heard back from her yet on that.
Who's Stacy, I'm sorry?
Versus
Stacy, DDA attorney.
Yeah.
versus the line item budget. So I would like to see it as its own freestanding category. I think we also need, and I know we talked about this last month, we need to put some money into our legal budget. And that was just based on the conversation that we had had with her.
Sure.
When we had talked about what was in that line item. She
'Cause I
just
think what we
smiled
can,
at us.
so what I think we can do is, if we have these, ultimately the staff at Plant Moran is going to, can put, if we're requesting this, they'll probably be able to, if we can expand the categories, they
Yeah.
can do it for us, and put things where they need to be for the final presentation. And that would be my suggestion. Once we know where we want to put the money, give it to them. If they need to create new categories or expand on these, we'll get the approval, we'll give it to them based on what this board agrees on.
Sure.
And we'll have a final draft to approve.
And that's totally fair and appropriate. That was my concern, and again, based on kind of what we had talked about, or I had, and then the communication with you and her, is dropping it into a category that has other line items. It doesn't secure those funds for that item. It's movable at any point. So that's kind of my take on that. But it was a really great meeting with the marketing company, a really comprehensive package. We had talked about, quite a few different things and different ways this package could go. We had even talked about at some point in the future, if we wanted to add more funds to it, maybe next year, putting together an actual marketing plan to focus on bringing the businesses that we want to Romeo. So really saying, okay, we want to see a bakery, we want to see a shoe store, we want to see whatever these are, and they would be targeting and putting together a marketing program to go to those types of businesses and say, hey, come to Romeo. And this is where I think the pillars kind of work together. And I thought, I'd have to go back and look at the minutes, but I thought that we did adopt the pillars by motion when we agreed to the pillars at the meeting. But this
to
is
form the subcommittee.
To form the subcommittee. So that was agreed upon by the board. But this is where they would be able to market and say, come to Romeo. We have a great incubator program to help you get your, whatever type of business off the ground. So that's something just kind of forward thinking. Next year's budget is possibly doing that, or maybe we can get some grants for that sort of thing. But definitely they are open to working with us. How they kind of explained it would work is we would have a monthly meeting. They would put together a full calendar of the upcoming month's activities for us to approve, including all social media posts, targeted Facebook posts in specific demographics. So if we're looking that we can pull people from 3 hours away, they will post Facebook ads in those demographics, areas. And then each quarter we would have a meeting where we would be able to say, okay, here's the design that we've communicated as like our overall message and our overall focus. And then each quarter we could highlight on what's coming up. So in third quarter we could be talking about, we want this overall marketing program to continue on, but we want to focus on these sorts of events or things that are happening in town.
Great.
Music-wise, a little off my numbers. I got 2 quotes and they're more like in the 10,000 range.
And was that for new or repair?
That was for new.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so I was trying to find, and I'm waiting for a call back from the village office to see if I can get to the transmitter box so I can get a model and then see if we can do anything with repair. And maybe getting us down more to that 5,000, or I think you had mentioned possibly even a cost sharing.
Yeah, I think because that was kind of part of the resolution that we looked at before with the village and getting into the cost sharing projects. It doesn't have to be one big project. We can break it down into smaller ones too. We would just be going to them. Anything that's a mutually beneficial use, which anything that we try to do should be, because we're all in the same village.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that board is receptive to what we want to do. In addition, if they bring anything to our board as well, we would be open to listening to that too. So I think there's got to be a little bit of a mutual beneficial relationship in that, where we're bringing things to them and they're bringing things to us that we can move forward with.
And I wonder, and I don't know if you had put this in the email, but I almost wonder if the Lions Club might be someone that might want to partner, if that's a system that they would then be able to use at Peach
That was
Festival
that
time.
app, that they've already developed, and I know they're always looking to promote it. It's been kind of a slower growth thing on their end, but the foundation's there, and I know they're still actively putting it out there. So why start from scratch when there's already this foundation? If we can work with them and help them to kind of do a collaborative effort, not just with the village, but other organizations like Lions Club or Chamber, I think that's all great ways that we can reduce our financial obligation to these projects at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Danielle?
Yeah, I, just looking at this, speaking of the revenue sharing, I liked seeing a little bit more there that we could do, the group projects. I am a little concerned, with the events, understanding that we might want to reduce that a little bit at this point with commitments that we have made. I'm not comfortable totally reducing it that much.
Mhm.
Not opposed to reducing it for the remainder of the year and definitely considering it for next year, when we are looking at our events and what we want to do for the events.
So are you saying more or less in events for,
Not reducing it to 7,500.
okay, because it was previously 20, so you're saying maybe somewhere more in the middle of that?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Because I'm wondering too if like we know the events potentially bring in sponsorship dollars, right? So if we can offset some of those costs and, really, at the end of the day, any event, if it can be paid for through
Right.
sponsorships and donations, and that's how we put it on, where there's no financial liability of the
Right.
board.
Right.
It's a bigger win at that point.
Correct.
So if that could
Correct.
be one way to put some
Yeah.
more funds in that, so it's not
Right.
strictly coming out of our operating
Right.
budget.
Great. So that was just one little concern that I had. I wanted us to talk about. And then, my little baby incubator program, I do really want to see us be able to put a little bit of
Sure.
time into that. Again, I don't think for this budget that it needs much actual dollars.
Yeah, I think you said a couple thousand.
Yeah, a couple thousand maybe. This is gonna be more legwork, and this isn't gonna be really instant gratification. It's gonna be a long-term project that to see any, real benefits. But hopefully if we keep down the dollars that we're actually putting into it, and I know people's time is still dollars, but as far as, the budget,
It's enough to get things started
it's
and
enough
get
to
the
get
ball
things
rolling on
started
the
and see
project.
if it's something, there's a lot of communities around us that have already done it. And we can really pull from their expertise. Dana Walker has done it in Imlay City. So I'm sure she would be open to coming and having some conversation with us about it.
Do you think that would fall under office expense for because it's trying to figure out where it would
Right.
be coming from. I don't know if it would be
I
more
would think
professional
so
services or.
at this point, because it's just kind of more groundwork and seeing what we can get off the ground.
Because that's the thing, these expenditures are gonna happen through board action. It's gonna be
Right.
what's brought forward and what do we approve for spending on and where is
Right.
it coming at that point? Say, okay, we've got X amount of dollars in the office expense budget, that's where this is gonna come from. And that's
Right.
kind of traditionally how we've operated in the past, where
Mhm.
it's, here's what we wanna do, where's it gonna come from now that we know what the action needs to be? And
Right.
that's why this budget is kind of static. It's going to change as we move through the year, not necessarily because of what's happening internally in the office, but how, when, and why this board is choosing to execute on certain projects. So that's kind of more how we work through the entire year with this.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah.
all right.
Anything?
Can I, I'm sorry.
Sure.
So what was your dollar amount for the events? What were you recommending?
I don't know that I necessarily have a specific dollar amount. I mean, maybe 12,000. My thing is, I think John touched on it, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm gonna put words in your mouth, John. The last budget meeting is, I kept thinking about turning on a dime. We have made commitments. We have published an event calendar, and yes, it can change 100%. I mean, everything's changeable. And unfortunately, our event calendar and our budget calendar don't coincide, so they're overlapping each other. And I think with a little, give and take both ways, we can kind of move through the end of this year. And if this board decides and the pillars decide going into the next calendar year that all of the events aren't necessarily what we're looking to do, we're looking to move some stuff and do infrastructure and spend more time on that, we can make those decisions.
Thanks, Danielle.
Can I ask you a question about
Sure.
the $2,000?
Yeah.
If you were, from what I understood for the incubator program,
Yeah.
we were talking about like helping people their first couple of months, maybe the first quarter, whatever, with their rent. Where does that come from? Is that something where we're hoping that we'll have donations or?
So that's what I'm hoping this first year we can figure out with the incubator program is, A lot of places get corporate sponsors, and they get them to sponsor for a year, 2 years, even 3 years. And they are completely sponsoring that incubator program, so they cover the rent of that building or that space. The person coming in, the entrepreneur, is paying a small portion, might cover electricity, paper copies, that kind of thing. But the majority of that rent and everything is covered by that corporate sponsor. So it would be a matter of, do we have corporate sponsors that are willing to do that, are interested in partnering with us and doing that? Do we have interest from businesses to come in and to do that and to come to Romeo? Which I think kind of coincides with what you were talking about in the social media and the marketing,
Right.
is getting new businesses here. If we have that incubator program set up, we can say, we have a spot for you. There's a whole interview process, there's a whole application process, it's a whole thing. And those are the things that I'd like to see us try to do that first
Sure.
go around, is kind of get some of that groundwork under us. And we're not reinventing the wheel. There's many communities that have done it. And probably can tell us what the pitfalls are and what works best and so forth, so we can hopefully save a little money up front.
Right. Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks.
John?
I don't really have a lot. I will mention, first of all, thank you, Zach, for putting together the sheet you brought in today. It does help, I think, clarify. I will mention that we are, I believe, we are looking at this as far as it is a living document. Okay, we've read the letter. It's been mentioned. We've all said. So we're not drilling down to every single line. I will put out the word of caution regarding category budget versus line item budget. If you think it takes a while getting through a category budget, could you imagine if we were in fact moving forward with a line item, we would be spending an awful lot of time on it. And then once this is implemented, you're talking day-to-day operations when you're having to control a line item budget, which again is extremely time consuming, and we just need to be, I'm just putting that out there, I believe we should be cautious about that. We have to put together our overall general categories and honor the board and our employees to manage it properly, correctly. And the biggest trigger as far as watching what's going on is going to be the reporting aspect, whether it's before monies are spent or after monies are spent. And that I'm very encouraged on, because I think going forward here, we can all agree reporting aspects of the financials between board members, between committees, subcommittees, and employees, we can all agree needs to be clarified, defined, and followed through, I guess would be my point on that. So the comments regarding line item budget, category budget, I would definitely warn against line item day-to-day operations budget. I like the category budget. I like what the sheet that came in today. I definitely appreciate Danielle's mention regarding events. I had referenced major changes on a dime. I don't think will benefit everyone as a whole, so we need to be careful of that. If we've got some major changes, absolutely, that's why we're here, we want to talk about. But we've got to be conscious of that time. I mean, specifically as Danielle said, if we want to talk about events, there is a calendar. We're not changing something starting tomorrow, but if we don't talk about it now, it's not going to change in 8 months, 10 months, 12 months. So I'm glad for the discussions, but money-wise, let's make sure we're realistic on what we do want to do over the next 6-8 months while we're discussing further ahead in the future. Lastly would be, I'm sure two quite sensitive issues on this budget. if you just look at percentage and you go to the employee line, percentage of the overall budget, we have to be aware of that. I would love for that employee line to be increased, which is what at one point was proposed. I just don't see, when you're talking about a budget like this, at this moment where it can. So I don't want that not to be said. I don't want to dismiss that. It's very important. I believe it needs to be done. It's another one of these things, can it be done this minute, or is that something we've got to work towards to do a better job as far as that employee line item number? Finally, we definitely need goals, and I do like the way these goals are listed out, and we hit those goals, boy, everyone will be happy. Until we do hit those goals, we have to be realistic. We can't spend something before we have it. So my point of pulling those out, I know it can be a sensitive issue at the table, but I think it's very important because they are funds that we do not have to spend, so we can't spend them. And
Can I just point
Yeah.
something really quick on those sponsorships, donations, and grants for the goals? I don't want these to be viewed, because they're very lofty goals.
Mhm.
So I do not want any confusion that these are standards that we're trying to hold our employee to, that if you don't get this, you are subject to, review. I mean, this is something that if these are great goals to have, and if we hit it, fantastic, but I don't want that person's job, whether it's Elizabeth as our executive director or anybody else, to be her performance to necessarily be correlated directly to this in any way, shape, or form.
I don't
These are
think
just
that's
goals.
been on the table ever.
Well, no,
Yeah.
I'm just,
Yep.
we're calling them goals, so
Sure.
I don't,
Right.
if we fall short, I don't want to cause any confusion.
No,
you know.
and to that point, these are not goals for the executive director. These are goals
board in
for
general
the
and-
entire DDA
Yeah.
organization. Executive director is a key component of that, but between us helping executive director or us in our way, finding a way to hit these goals on our own or in our subcommittee groups. Yeah, this is for all of us.
Yep.
This is not for one individual, so that's a good point to make as well.
Thanks,
I
Jim.
just had a quick question or
Sure.
comment on that. Since these are lofty goals and they're kind of stretch goals, do we look at making that a more reasonable number that makes sense, that we can actually be hitting? I mean, to say 20,000, and I think we had talked about it last month, was as far as donations, a goal of 20,000, and I think the last 2 years we hit 12 and like 4.
Mm-hmm.
So to say we're going to hit 20,000, should we have a more reasonable goal of 14,000?
Well, I will say this very quickly, because I don't want to, I think that's a great conversation for another meeting.
Okay.
I was just pulling out those numbers that were specifically
here.
referenced, so
Yeah.
that's where I got those from. It's not part of the budget, I just wanted to pull those out so we knew why there was a difference from meeting to meeting. But I think that is a separate conversation for another time for the board to determine what is that dollar amount, because that's not gonna be part of anything that Village is approving or that we're walking away from a decision on.
Fundraising.
Yeah, it was just to give a snapshot where we pulled that out of, and that's up to the board if they want to actually put those kind of benchmarks in place moving forward.
Okay.
Deborah, floor is yours.
All right, so for the design committee, what we are asking for is $25,000 to cover the cost of initial design plans to look at converting alleys into gathering spaces. And also, Greg, I had $7,000 down there, but now that you've got 2 and one of them's 8, do you think that the $5,000 bid was probably a reasonable company and we should go somewhere in the middle still, or should that be raised to 8?
They're just, again, they're quotes that they put based on a little bit of field research and such, so, one was at 5 and one was at 8, so I think we can comfortably know that, for under $10,000, we could get a pretty doggone accurate, which is far cheaper, far less expensive than what I thought it was gonna be, so they may get in there, and as they start trying to pull deeds and descriptions and all that, it could turn into a little bit of a can of worms just because of how old the original plat is. So I don't know.
And I want to mention this too, so like, if Greg brings these two quotes forward, that's when it's the job of this board to look at what we have allocated in our budget, what these quotes are, how they vary, and what the scope of work that they're providing, and determine who we're going to move forward with. So it sounds like there's an option where this board could choose to spend 5, but there's also an option where this board could choose to spend 8, depending on how.
Well,
they
I think
wanna
we
move
have to
forward.
create a spec so that both of them have to agree that they're both quoting to that same spec, so that we know, is this guy actually cheaper or is he
Sure.
doing less?
Well, there will be some situations where you put that out for RFP, and then it comes back where they're not quoting certain aspects of
Right.
it, and it will look different at the end of the day. But I get your point. Yeah, there's, and I was, that 25,000 that you're asking for the alleys, I would see that coming out of the CBD revenue sharing
Okay.
portion of the budget, which covers us for how we have it set up right now.
But do we kind of think that we need to bump up that 7 and make it at least 8, if one of them came in at 8, but?
I don't think we need to get that specific on it.
Okay.
Because it'll fall into the category, because I think at that point too, like I made the point earlier, there might be grants out there that we could seek if that's a project that we want to pursue.
And my other question was, did we get specific about what number we're setting aside for legal? Did we actually?
Well, I've got 15,000 proposed under professional services.
Does that include anything else, though?
well,
That's my question, exactly.
Potentially, yes. So really, your professional services, where is it here in the line item budget? So you've got legal fees, you've got contracted accounting fees.
Would that be Plant Moran?
Correct, Elizabeth?
I believe so. I believe so.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what line are you on?
I'm looking at the 802 audit and
Is there
contracted
a
accounting
separate
fees.
bookkeeping cost in addition to Plant Moran accounting?
Yes, it's very nominal. It's in employee expenses.
Oh, okay. So it's not in that professional services, it's in employee, okay.
At the present time, correct.
But we are going to be looking to reduce that cost, correct, Elizabeth? Bring that down.
Yes, if this board so chooses, yes.
Yeah, so we can probably save some funds on the accounting, and 15,000 in the legal fees if we don't use it for that specifically. We could always use it for our HR needs and forming some practices moving forward for this board as it pertains to hiring employees and bringing new staff on. So there's more of an onboarding process, which we don't have currently.
I just have a quick question. And if there was ever a time that we said, okay, there was money left in legal fees, and we want to move that to the incubator program, then we'd go back to village council and say we're actually moving it from a category, and they would reapprove.
Yeah, well, I think I was actually corrected at the last meeting. I don't think we have to send it to village council. We just, as a board, I thought originally that we did, but I think we as a board just have to amend the budget and move that around. I don't think it has to go to the village again. It's up to this board after we submit this initial one that's approved. We make the changes to or we amend the budget after that.
Okay.
If needed.
So as long as we're not changing the scope of the budget, if we're just moving stuff inside.
Well, you'd still, I mean, if you decide that, you're not going to spend money on professional services, there's no point in it sitting there for the remainder of the year
Right.
if there's other projects you want to take on instead. So you could, you're just changing it within the categories, not
Yeah.
with the line items. So. does that
And
make
so we
sense?
don't have to, once we wouldn't have to, just to speak on the items, so then we wouldn't be going back. It would shorten the time of us making a change, because we wouldn't have to go back to the village council
Correct.
each time. Okay,
Correct.
got
Just
it.
within your own board, you have to approve that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Good, Deborah?
Yes, I had one question about the legal fees for the ongoing issue. Do we want to try to offset that so it's not coming out of the residents' benefits to infrastructure and all that kind of stuff? Do we want to try to offset that with another line item? Because I was thinking that if we're gonna start trying to get, I shouldn't say start trying to get, let the business owners get more involved in the events like they would like to, maybe we can offset that money, that 15,000, by not having the assistant anymore. Keep Elizabeth, keep the bookkeeping until you can phase that out, or whatever it is that you're planning to do to reduce it. And then use those funds that way so that it doesn't come out of infrastructure, because the infrastructure is so woefully suffering. And we need something in the village to get the message across that we're getting serious about cleaning it up, you know?
And just to speak on that, I don't think that to cover our legal fees should come out of the benefits and services we offer to the taxpayers. I think that should come out of our monies, and
Something that we benefit from.
yeah,
not
and
them.
let them have the
That's
services
kind
that
of my
they should
point.
have.
Yeah.
This issue is not a taxpayer created issue, so for them to say we're going to take 10,000 out of events or 10,000 out of doing a stake survey to cover legal fees, it just doesn't seem right to me.
Well, let me just make this comment. You're not really taking anything out of anything else. The board's determining the budget. So those dollar amounts, I mean, you could look at it that way, I guess, but realistically, there's nothing where somebody's handing this over and saying, this is your set budget, this is where you have to pull money from, there's 70,000 here. If you decided that there's gonna be $0 in decorations this year, because it has to go to I mean,
Right.
that's the choice of the board, it's not
Right.
necessarily
But I mean,
employee
I
as
think
an
that's what she's
overall
saying.
bucket
Well,
in
that's-
the village, it's the DDA budget.
Right, which is what we're looking at here. These are your numbers, whether you're pulling it from employee or you're pulling it for less money in CBD revenue sharing. That's kind of what we're looking at and what we're formulating.
Right, but I'm saying if somebody has to give up something, should it be the villagers, the residents, or should it be us?
I mean, I don't think that, I don't know if that's the right way to look at it.
Yeah, I
mean,
don't
it's-
understand.
Well, would it come from then?
It's coming out of our tax collection,
No,
period.
no,
mean,
I know, but
everything's our-
I think what she's saying is where in the, to make these numbers
Is it a
work,
separate-
we have to pull and push, right? You gotta take a little bit from here and put it over here. So I think that correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't wanna speak for you, but I think that's what you're saying, is where are we gonna be pulling from?
I don't know if that's something that we have to discuss right now.
So I don't think we're gonna be able to have
Well,
a
we
budget though.
just have to formulate these numbers. I mean, at the end of the day, if you said, hey, we're gonna put 221,550 into employee expense, I mean, that's the budget that you're presenting. You're not gonna be able to do anything else, but that's the budget that we're tasked with
Right.
presenting.
So you're saying we don't have to make that decision today, but we could make it later?
That's what I'm saying.
Well, I guess I'm confused as to what we're calling, because you're not taking money out of a certain area because the board's determining how much goes in each area. You know what I mean? That's what this board's deciding on today to move forward with.
Right, but we wouldn't have had this need for this money if we didn't have this action going on. So it kind of is drawing from a budget that would have otherwise had an extra $10,000 to $15,000.
No, I understand that. So
Oh, I'm sorry,
let's just
okay,
say if we've got
explain it again.
yeah, so if we've got 15,000 here in professional services, right?
Yep.
So,
But isn't 10 of that because of this legal action?
well, we don't. We don't know. There's nothing there yet. We're preparing ourselves for.
Well, I mean,
the
we do have
potential.
invoices coming in.
There will be invoices, but we're not into. That's still this.
Right,
current
I
budget
understand,
year.
I understand.
This is
I see,
for-
I
this is
see.
for
So that's
next
coming
year.
out of this year?
Up
If
until
they're
June
built-
30th.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So what we're looking at now is for next year's spending. So we're allocating that 15,000 here. So when you say where is it coming from, well, I guess the better question is, are you saying you want to change some of these other numbers because there's more here?
I guess I'm just saying with a 221,500, whatever it is,
Mhm.
total budget, 70 is a lot of that. I mean, that's a third of the budget, you know what I mean?
I think that's what John was also
Yeah.
speaking on.
It's just such a big portion of it, and I think it's just an opportunity to use some money on some infrastructure instead.
Well, I will. So that employee expense is unchanged. So we didn't put any more into that category.
I agree.
So it's unchanged from previous years from, I guess, in my opinion, from a consistency standpoint. That just keeps your office staff where they were last year, and it allows us to maintain consistency moving forward. So
I
if you start
thought,
taking
though,
away
this-
from that,
I thought this included the assistant going to full-time though.
no, I removed that, because otherwise it would have been, there would have been an extra 20,000 in there. So we did already remove that. That's that 70,000 down from 93,150, because 20,000 of that was going to come from sponsorships and donations. So we pulled that out, kept it consistent with last year, which puts us at the 70,000. So it is less than what you saw here, but it's on par with what we did this previous year, that $70,000 amount.
So to speak on that, I don't want to take over your time,
No,
but
that's okay.
if we are changing our focus of where we're putting time in it, if we're not going to be so event-based, and not that we're not going to have any events, but we're not just going to be an event board, because we're going to be having the incubator program, we're going to be having a marketing program, we're going to be having the streetscape, and do we need that position?
Well, I would see it as this. While we may not be doing, if our focus is to change from events and not be so event-heavy driven, there are still going to be things that come as a result of our shift in focus. There's going to be things that if we do take on an alley project, there are things that this office is going to have to handle internally in regards to it. If we're doing more with the marketing campaign, how are we supporting that internally? If we're going after sponsorships and donations of $20,000, if we're going after grants for potentially $20,000, it's going to change the scope of the work, sure, but it's still needed to have a staff and to be operational in that manner. So
Yeah, no,
I think
we definitely need a
I think it's
staff.
going to be. I just think it's going to allow the board or the staff here with the board to succeed in other ways, maybe with not necessarily a completely different vision, but just a shift in focus.
Maybe then, and this is probably a conversation for a different time,
Sure.
then maybe that position needs to be realigned. Maybe it needs to be a focus of being a grant writer. Or, because if we're not going to be event heavy, then to have it titled as an event coordinator, thank you, then maybe that doesn't make sense anymore. Maybe it needs to be shifted and say, okay, this position is now going to be focused on grant writing and
Can we stay with the budget?
Let me ask a question.
Set a job
Yeah.
description.
I've,
Why don't you just
I've
mention
been
it's
thinking
8
that
o'clock?
a lot about, the job review, and one of the very consistent.
I'm sorry,
talk about
no,
the
I'm
job.
sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
You want
I
to go
was
all the
only
way
bringing it
around,
up
and I
as
haven't had a chance to
a
say
benefit
anything.
of you.
No,
I
I'm
wanted to
sorry,
talk
I don't want to
about
have this conversation right now.
Definitely
Okay,
now's not the
okay.
time. We're
All
talking
right,
about the budget.
forget
Let's
that.
stick with the numbers.
Let me say this in a different way then. As a group, I think we all think her shining light is donations. That she does a great job at getting donations. That's all I was gonna say.
Sure.
And I think that that's a great focus, is the more donations, the more time she has to focus on donations, and the more donations we bring in, the more we can really bolster all the things that we're trying to do. And I think that that's a great focus. I don't know if everybody's thinking the same way, because maybe that's where I'm kind of, saying, if that's what's going on, and then these other pillars are working on the promotions and the event coordination and stuff, then I just think maybe that position is more focused and doesn't necessarily need the assistant to do the
So that's-
event coordination.
Yeah, I think that's a different conversation. I don't think that's necessarily relevant to what we're talking about right now. It's so specific with the goals and objectives. We need to finalize these numbers and get something on paper here that we can all agree on. Now, if your position is, I think that number needs to be $50,000. Hey, that's your prerogative, and that's if that's what you want to suggest to the rest of this board, that's fine. And nobody's arguing that fact, but we.
Yeah,
No.
I guess that is exactly what I
Okay.
yeah.
propose.
And if we want to
55.
move events to more like 15,000, then that's where it could potentially come from.
Zach, I don't wanna rush anything,
Yeah.
but we have this scheduled till 8:15. I do have to go at 8:15, I have to
Okay.
get my daughter to school. So I know that this is important and I don't want to rush through it and I want to give everybody appropriate time, but it was scheduled
Yep.
till 8:15.
All right, Marty, do you have anything to add?
So I agree, you know, we need to keep focusing, keep focused and keep moving on and show the board, the trustee, the village, that, you know, we can do this. We just gotta figure it out and work together. So we need to just keep moving forward. I'm sorry, I cannot talk with these braces
You're all right.
on lately.
So,
You know, I would like to see, at least for the next year, not so many events. Let's focus on the, you know, downtown Romeo. Let's make it more appealing. You know, we have these empty buildings, and I don't know who I was talking to, but I love the idea of taking down the paper, putting down the big logo down, you know, downtown Romeo. I love that. I'm not saying let's eliminate the events that we already have committed to, but maybe cut down on them for a year and focus on Romeo. My other question is, how many signers are on a check?
We have 3 signers on the account. It's myself, Elizabeth, and, well, it was Carl, but Carl's obviously not on the board any
Right.
longer, so whoever this board decides to replace him as the vice chair would be added to the account.
Okay, so when a check is actually written,
Mm-hmm.
how many signers are on that check?
2 signers on the check.
So you both sign any checks before it's submitted?
Carl and myself sign all the checks, yep. And
Okay.
there's receipts with them, and that's what you guys are approving at the, at our regular meetings when we do make a motion to pay the bills, basically.
Okay, so Elizabeth doesn't sign any checks?
yes, I do have a check.
She can, like, so for instance, since Carl's not there, she and I can sign the checks, but she cannot solely sign a check.
That was my question.
Yes,
Okay.
it takes 2 signatures on all of our checks.
All right, that's it, I'll keep it short.
Okay, so I'm just gonna throw out some new numbers out here after what we've all talked about, so we can kind of fine tune this a little bit. I'm just gonna go down the road, or go down the line here to get to the 221,550. I've got $70,000 in employee, 15,000 for professional service. I took decorations down to 70,000. I increased events to 12,550. I brought CBD revenue sharing from 35 down to 30. I've got $9,000 for the office expense, and then I put $15,000 into the marketing plan, and as a new separate category just to keep that.
But it's 20,000, not 50.
Well, we're talking numbers. We're moving. I
Right.
understand that that's what you're asking for, but based on this budget, that's I'm throwing out 15,000 since we're starting kind of new with that. It's a new approach. So, and like I said, I'm not the end all be all.
No,
I'm
no,
just
I
throwing these
understand. I'm
numbers
just
out here
saying,
to kind of
I
based
don't
on what
think
everybody said.
we're gonna get the services for 15,000, so I would propose we lower the employee expenses to allow funding for all of the objectives of the board.
Could we pull the 5 from events instead, so we can keep employee consistent without reducing anybody's hours or changing anybody's pay rate? And then we'll bring the events down to 7,550 and put the 5 back into marketing for the 20,000.
Well, then we're not addressing the event concern.
Of having more. I'm hoping we can get that through sponsorship. I know it seems
Yeah,
hard
it's-
to.
I would be more comfortable with that than, at this point, reducing our employee expense when we haven't had any goals or objectives discussion. So I would prefer to see that reduced, and knowing that we are good at getting sponsorships, and hope that we can continue our events
Yeah.
through that.
I think that's a better number of what Danielle just mentioned as far as where to take it. My other concern though is decorations. Aren't these something that already, I hate to use the word committed to, don't we already have a season which overlaps this budget?
Yes.
I mean, that's where this number came from, so I don't know how that's gonna be reduced.
Well, but don't we have to approve the winter budget or the holiday decorations? Because that was Matt
Yeah.
DeRoche's last year, so it's just gonna have to change
We'll
what
have
we.
a chance to modify
Yeah,
that
we're
when it
just
comes
gonna have
to
to
it for the
change.
winter.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're just gonna have to reduce some of our get at that point. We don't know what the cost is gonna be. I know we did receive lower bids this past year, but we went with Jaroche because we were supporting local and we were doing consistency, and they've always done a great job
In
for
the
us, so
interest
there was ways to save money.
Oh, Daniel, Elizabeth, since you're the executive director, what do you think about what Zach proposed there? I know Daniel's got to go here in just a moment.
I'm incredibly discouraged and disheartened. I feel that that it's gone so fast, so quickly that there's no continuity between the board and the staff. We had one workshop. I think there's training that needs to happen on
Okay,
all
well,
sides.
on this budget.
On this budget,
Yeah.
I'm concerned about, considering that there's other uncompleted projects that haven't, well, they're uncompleted, right? We have a local marketing company that we already have a contract with, so I would be concerned about some of that. Staff
Well,
can
that's
do
for
some of that, so.
that's
We're not-
for website development, that's not.
So as far as the budget, I guess I'm encouraged, Zach, that you are looking at it as a goal versus an expectation for that additional revenue. There's not a lot of incentive at this point to do that type of thing, so, but from the hard numbers perspective, I think it's fine.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, thanks.
I know you have to go, Danielle, and I wanted you to hear what she brought.
Thank you.
We don't have to, we're just, this is just discussion, we're not approving anything at this time. So I would just wanna make sure everybody's okay, I wanna make sure I understood this right. 70,000 for employee, 15,000 professional services, 70,000 for decorations, 7,550 for events, $30,000 for CBD revenue sharing, $9,000 for office expense, and $20,000 for marketing. And that's what we'll take back to Plant Moran. Are we all good?
Yep.
Great.
Well done, Zach.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate everybody coming out here early. I know some of you guys were at the meeting last night too, so it was a long day, long time for everybody, but I appreciate everybody getting together here. I need a motion to adjourn.
Well, I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Motion by McLeod, do I have a second? Second by Rose, all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.